China's Shadow Emperor, the rise and fall of Wei Zhongxian. In the winter of 1627, as imperial guards approached his residence, the most powerful man in China prepared to die. He wasn't the emperor. In fact, he was a eunuch who had started life as an illiterate street thug. Yet Wei Zhongxian had risen to command an empire from the shadows, building a network of spies that stretched across China, amassing a personal fortune that rivaled the imperial treasury, and even having temples erected to himself while he was still alive. For 7 years, every significant decision in the Ming Dynasty, from the appointment of officials to the execution of enemies, passed through his hands. Now, with the death of his imperial patron and protector, the Tianqi Emperor, Wei faced the consequences of his unprecedented grasp for power. The story of Wei Zhongxian isn't just a tale of palace intrigue, it's a testament to how far ambition and cunning could take a man in imperial China, even one who had sacrificed his manhood for a chance at power. From the cramped quarters of palace servants to the commanding heights of empire, Wei's rise and fall would help seal the fate of the Ming Dynasty itself. His legacy would serve as a warning to future Chinese rulers about the dangers of allowing too much power to accumulate in the hands of those who stood behind the Dragon Throne. This is the story of China's Shadow Emperor, a man who proved that sometimes the most powerful person in an empire isn't the one wearing the crown. From the streets to the Forbidden City, the rise of Wei Zhongxian. The autumn wind howled through the streets of Suning as Wei Zhongxian, then known simply as Wei Jin, lost another game of dice. Blood trickled from his split lip, a reminder of his last failed attempt to escape his gambling debts. At 21, he had already earned a reputation as one of the most notorious troublemakers in Hebei province, alternating between running small-time protection rackets and losing what he extorted at the gambling tables. His parents had long since given up on their volatile son, and local officials had a stack of complaints against him that grew taller by the month. It was in this desperate state that Wei first heard the whispers that would change his life. The imperial court was seeking new eunuchs. The Forbidden City's constant appetite for servants meant that even a man of his dubious background could find a path to steady employment if he was willing to pay the ultimate price. The procedure was brutal, with a mortality rate that terrified even a hardened street fighter like Wei. But those who survived gained entrance to a world of unimaginable wealth and power. In the halls of the Forbidden City, even a servant could rise to become the Emperor's most trusted advisor. Wei sold everything he owned to pay for the procedure. The surgery was performed by a specialist who had a reputation for higher survival rates than most, though higher still meant that nearly 4 in 10 died. Wei was strapped down and given strong wine, a piece of leather to bite down on, and a brief moment to reconsider his choice. He didn't hesitate. The cut was quick, the pain extraordinary. For 3 days he lay between life and death, his fate hanging on whether the wound would heal or fester. Unlike many others who made the same choice that year, Wei survived. Entering the Forbidden City as a eunuch was like being born again, quite literally, as Wei was given a new name and identity. Gone was Wei Jin, the street thug. In his place stood Wei Zhongxian, imperial servant. He began at the bottom of the palace hierarchy, cleaning chamber pots and scrubbing floors. But even in these humble beginnings, Wei demonstrated a talent that would serve him well, an uncanny ability to gather information. He learned which servants knew the most gossip, which guards could be bribed for access to restricted areas, and most importantly, which palace officials were vulnerable to manipulation. For a man who had spent his youth running street rackets, the politics of the palace were simply a more refined version of the same game. His early years in the Forbidden City taught him the most crucial lesson of all. In the Imperial court, true power rarely announced itself. It moved quietly through whispered conversations, through carefully cultivated relationships, through knowing exactly when to speak and when to remain silent. Wei watched, learned, and waited. The teenage gambler who had once fought for copper coins in the streets of Suning was transforming into something far more dangerous, a master of palace intrigue who understood that patience, not force, was the key to real power. The Art of Invisible Power, Wei Zhongxian's Ascent, 1590 to 1615. Wei's first significant break came through an unlikely source, his prowess at foot massage. In a palace where physical contact with the imperial family was strictly controlled, eunuchs who could provide comfort without threatening propriety were invaluable. Wei's strong hands, which had once been used to extort protection money, now needed the tired feet of court officials. As he worked, he listened. Every groan of relief was accompanied by a loose tongue, every session an opportunity to gather secrets. Through these intimate moments, Wei learned of a power struggle brewing in the imperial nursery. Madame Ke, the wet nurse to the future Tianqi emperor, was quietly building her own network of influence. Unlike other courtiers who dismissed her as a mere servant, Wei recognized a kindred spirit, another outsider who understood how to accumulate power from the shadows. He began passing her choice pieces of information gleaned from his massage sessions, carefully positioning himself as an invaluable ally. The relationship between Wei and Madame Ke would reshape the empire. While other palace intriguers focused on currying favor with current power holders, Wei and Ke played a longer game. They invested their energy in the young prince who would become the Tianqi emperor, understanding that real influence came not from serving the powerful, but from shaping those who would become powerful. The prince, who showed more interest in carpentry than statecraft, came to rely heavily on Madame Ke's maternal guidance and through her on Wei's counsel. But Wei's growing influence attracted dangerous attention. In 1610, a powerful court official attempted to have him reassigned to a distant provincial post. Wei responded with a lesson learned from his street fighting days: strike first, strike hard. He arranged for compromising evidence of corruption to reach the right ears. The official was stripped of his position and exiled. The message was clear: Wei Zhongxian was no ordinary eunuch to be trifled with. By 1615, Wei had transformed the traditional role of palace eunuch into something new and terrifying. He controlled a network of spies that spread through every level of the imperial household. His allies held key positions throughout the palace bureaucracy. And most importantly, he had the complete trust of Madame Ke, who herself held the devotion of the future emperor. When the old emperor's health began to fail, those in the know understood. The real power in the Forbidden City wouldn't pass to his successor, but to the shadowy eunuch who had spent 25 years preparing for this moment. The illiterate street thug from Suning had mastered the art of invisible power. The next phase would be anything but invisible. The rise of Wei Zhongxian, a perfect storm of power, 1615 to 1620. The Wanli Emperor's death in 1620 set in motion exactly the scenario Wei had spent decades preparing for. His successor, the Taichung Emperor, lasted only a month on the throne, dying under mysterious circumstances that some historians still debate. Into this power vacuum stepped the 15-year-old Tianqi emperor, more interested in carpentry and crafting elaborate wooden objects than in the arduous task of governing China's vast bureaucracy. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for Wei. The young emperor, overwhelmed by the duties thrust upon him, retreated into his workshops, spending days at a time crafting intricate pieces of furniture while state papers piled up unread. Into this void stepped Madame Kei, who had practically raised the emperor and her trusted advisor, Wei Zhongxian. The arrangement was simple. Wei would handle the burdensome affairs of state, allowing the emperor to pursue his artistic passions undisturbed. Within months, Wei had established an unprecedented system of control. Every morning, he would personally select which memorials and state papers would reach the emperor's desk. More importantly, he began drafting the emperor's responses, perfectly mimicking the imperial writing style. Officials throughout China soon learned that the real power no longer resided with the Dragon Throne, but with the eunuch who controlled access to it. The Donglin Academy, a powerful group of conservative Confucian scholars, raised the first serious opposition to Wei's growing influence. They submitted scathing memorials to the throne, condemning the impropriety of a eunuch wielding such authority. Wei's response revealed how much times had changed. He simply made sure these memorials never reached the emperor's desk. When the scholars persisted, they found their careers suddenly cut short, their allies mysteriously reassigned to distant posts. By 1620, Wei had assembled all the pieces necessary for absolute power: a disengaged emperor, a loyal ally in Madame Kei, and a bureaucracy increasingly paralyzed by fear. What he would do with this power would shock even the most cynical observers of Chinese politics. The man who had once been denied entry to government service due to his illiteracy was about to show China what true autocracy looked like. Shadow Emperor Ascendant, the rise and fall of Wei Zhongxian, 1620 to 1624. Wei's first major act of power shocked even his closest allies. He established the Eastern Depot, a feared secret police force that answered only to him. Unlike traditional imperial surveillance agencies, the Eastern Depot operated without oversight, maintaining a vast network of informants in every province. Neighbors spied on neighbors, servants on masters, sons on fathers. A casual criticism of Wei's influence could result in an entire family's destruction. The numbers tell a staggering story of his reign of terror. In a single year, more than 2,000 officials were imprisoned, exiled, or executed on Wei's orders. The infamous Red Scroll, a list of enemies to be eliminated, grew longer by the day. Even members of the imperial family found themselves powerless against his machinations. When the emperor's own uncles protested Wei's influence, they were swiftly imprisoned on fabricated charges of treason. But Wei's most audacious move was his bid for divine status. In an unprecedented display of hubris, he ordered temples dedicated to himself built across China. Local officials, desperate to curry favor, competed to construct the most elaborate shrines. By 1624, over 1,000 temples bore his image, where he was worshipped as 9,000 years, a title that placed him just below the emperor's 10,000 years in divine hierarchy. Court musicians were ordered to compose hymns in his praise, and mandatory offerings were made to his spirit tablets. His personal wealth grew to astronomical levels. The records of his estate, discovered after his fall, revealed a fortune that included vast land holdings, millions in silver, and a collection of precious jewels that rivaled the imperial treasury. Through a complex system of kickbacks and bribes, Wei had effectively turned the Ming bureaucracy into his personal piggy bank. Officials seeking appointment or promotion knew that generous gifts to Wei were not optional. Most remarkably, Wei achieved all this while maintaining the fiction of being a humble servant of the throne. In public, he performed elaborate displays of submission to the emperor, kowtowing with perfect form and speaking in the most deferential terms. But behind closed doors, even the Tianqi emperor understood the new reality. The son of heaven had become a puppet, and Wei Zhongxian was pulling the strings. The most powerful man in China was an illiterate eunuch who had mastered the art of ruling from behind the throne. The question wasn't whether such blatant usurpation of imperial authority could last. It was what would happen when it inevitably ended. Wei himself seemed to sense the precariousness of his position, sleeping in different rooms each night and employing food tasters. But even these precautions couldn't protect him from the one thing he couldn't control: time. The Tianqi emperor's health was failing, and with it, Wei's grip on absolute power. The Shadow Emperor's web of control, 1624 to 1627. At the height of his power, Wei's daily routine resembled that of an emperor more than a servant. Each morning, a procession of officials would wait outside his quarters, hoping for a moment of his attention. Those lucky enough to gain an audience would prostrate themselves before him, a gesture traditionally reserved for the emperor alone. Even high-ranking ministers performed this ritual, understanding that their careers and often their lives hung on Wei's whims. His control extended into every corner of Ming governance through an ingenious system of mutual surveillance. Each provincial governor was matched with a secret informant, often a lower-ranking official who reported directly to Wei's Eastern Depot. These informants documented every meeting, every decision, and every private conversation of their superiors. The resulting atmosphere of paranoia ensured compliance. No one dared oppose Wei when they couldn't be sure who might be watching. Wei's manipulation of the imperial examination system reshaped China's intellectual landscape. The traditional path to power mastery of Confucian classics was replaced by a new criterion: loyalty to Wei Zhongxian. Examination questions began to include thinly veiled references to current politics, and candidates who didn't praise Wei's governance found themselves mysteriously failing. An entire generation of China's scholar officials learned that academic excellence meant less than political submission. The sophistication of Wei's financial network was revealed in records discovered after his death. He had created a complex system of forced loans from wealthy merchants who were required to provide capital for his various schemes. These loans were rarely repaid, but the merchants dared not complain. They had seen what happened to those who crossed the Shadow Emperor. Through these mechanisms, Wei effectively privatized large portions of the Ming economy for his personal benefit. Perhaps most chilling was his control over the imperial archives. Wei ordered the systematic alteration of official records, ensuring that future generations would read a version of history that painted him in a favorable light. Scholars who attempted to maintain accurate records found themselves facing accusations of sedition. Even today, historians must carefully cross-reference multiple sources to separate fact from Wei's manufactured narrative. But as 1627 approached, cracks began appearing in Wei's carefully constructed system. The Tianqi Emperor's consumption of mercury-based immortality pills, a common practice among Ming rulers, was taking its toll. The emperor's health was failing rapidly, and his younger brother, the future Chongzhen Emperor, made no secret of his hatred for Wei. The Shadow Emperor's web of control, which had seemed unshakable, was about to face its ultimate test. The fall of Wei Zhongxian and the Ming Dynasty's decline. On September 30th, 1627, the Tianqi Emperor's mercury-ravaged body finally gave out. Within hours, the carefully constructed edifice of Wei's power began to crumble. The new Chongzhen Emperor, a man known for his diligence and hands-on approach to governance, wasted no time. His first imperial edict stripped Wei of all titles and ordered his immediate arrest. The same officials who had kowtowed to Wei just days before now raced to distance themselves, providing evidence of his crimes in desperate attempts to prove their own loyalty to the new regime. The Eastern Depot, that fearsome instrument of control, collapsed like a house of cards. Its agents, realizing which way the wind was blowing, either fled or switched allegiance. The 1,000 temples built to honor Wei were demolished with remarkable speed, their destruction often led by the same local officials who had competed to build them. Across China, people openly celebrated the fall of the man they had feared for so long. Wei himself fled the capital, but his escape was cut short at a checkpoint in Xian. Rather than face the public trial and execution that awaited him, he chose to end things on his own terms. The manner of his death strangulation with a silk sash held a dark irony. It was the same method used to execute imperial family members, a final act of presumption from a man who had dared to reach for imperial power. The Chongzhen Emperor's vengeance extended beyond the grave. Wei's body was disinterred and mutilated, his corpse exposed to public view as a warning. Madame Ke, his longtime ally, had already taken poison upon hearing of the Tianqi Emperor's death. Their entire network of supporters was systematically dismantled through a series of public trials that exposed the full scope of their corruption. The new emperor ordered a complete audit of Wei's estate. The findings were staggering: warehouses filled with gold, silver, and precious jewels, deeds to vast landholdings across multiple provinces, and detailed records of bribes received and enemies eliminated. The wealth accumulated by this former street thug turned eunuch would have been enough to fund the Ming military for several years, a fact that would prove tragically ironic as the dynasty faced its final challenges. But the most lasting damage wasn't to Wei's corpse or his reputation, it was to the Ming Dynasty itself. The period of Wei's dominance had weakened the imperial government at a crucial moment in history. The Manchus were gathering strength beyond the Great Wall, and popular unrest was growing throughout China. The Chongzhen Emperor would spend his entire reign trying to repair the damage done during Wei's 7 years of power, but it was too late. The Ming Dynasty never fully recovered from the Shadow Emperor's rule. In a final historical irony, Wei Zhongxian, the man who had accumulated more personal power than any eunuch in Chinese history, would be remembered as one of the key figures who helped destroy the very system he had worked so hard to control. Legacy of the Shadow Throne. Lessons from Wei Zhongxian's rise and fall. 3 centuries after Wei Zhongxian's death, the Qing dynasty established strict new laws limiting the power of palace eunuchs. The punishment for a eunuch interfering in state affairs. Immediate execution. These laws weren't created in response to any contemporary threat. They were written specifically to prevent another Wei Zhongxian from ever rising to power. His shadow loomed so large over Chinese political memory that even after hundreds of years, emperors still feared the possibility of another servant becoming master. The collapse of Wei's power structure revealed a deeper truth about Chinese imperial governance. The traditional Confucian system had been built on the assumption that educated scholar officials would act as a check on imperial power, providing moral guidance to the emperor. Wei had turned this system on its head, showing how a sufficiently ruthless individual could transform these checks and balances into instruments of personal control. His techniques, the use of secret police, the manipulation of bureaucratic appointments, the cultivation of informant networks, would be studied and replicated by power seekers throughout Chinese history. But perhaps Wei's most significant legacy was the lesson his rise and fall taught about the nature of absolute power itself. In the end, his elaborate network of spies couldn't protect him from the simple fact that all power based on a single person's favor is inherently fragile. The same system that allowed him to climb so high made his fall inevitable, a lesson that would be repeated throughout Chinese history, right up to the power struggles of the modern era. Today, in Beijing's Forbidden City, tourists walk past the former sites of Wei's power without realizing their significance. The quarters where he once commanded an empire have been rebuilt and repurposed many times over. But in Chinese political discourse, his name lives on as both a warning and a fascination, proof that sometimes the most dangerous threat to a system comes not from its enemies, but from those who understand its weaknesses too well.